Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 6th IDHN conference. My name is Irene Kirchner, but everyone calls me Irene. Please do so as well. I am the founder and director of the Islamicate Digital Humanities Network, and I would like to welcome our members today of the network, but also our guests. I would like to encourage our guests who are not members of the network yet to join the network. I promise that you will not be spammed with newsletters. We usually send out no more than around 2 emails per month. So it's really not that bad. The advantage of being a member is that you will get automatic updates on call for papers, on conferences and events. So I do highly recommend joining. It's completely free and very easy. Just send us an email to registration@idhn.org or go to our website idhn.org/contact and fill out the contact form. We are also always looking for volunteers that want to join our team. IDHN is not a one-woman show. It's actually a whole team of people who dedicate some of their time to making this show run. And we are currently looking for a social media expert who wants to take over our Twitter account and and Facebook, etc. So if you are interested in joining, I promise it's not a whole lot of work. Actually, everybody is welcome to join the team and dedicate as much time as they want and can. Again, if you are interested in doing so, please send us an email to info@idhn.org or team@idhn.org. But if it lands in our registration@idhn.org inbox, then we'll also read it. That said, I want to thank our amazing IDHN team for their work in organizing this conference, and especially my colleague Alicia, who has been communicating with everyone on the registration. She really is indispensable for this conference. So thank you so much to the whole team for your work. And with that is already all the announcements I will make today. When we will start with the conference, a few rules. So please use the chat to ask questions, to engage also during presentations. But be mindful that our presenters are focused on their presentation and will therefore not necessarily register your questions, as will I maybe potentially not always register them or remember them when we actually come to our time for questions. So we'll have 20-minute presentations and then time for 10 minutes per presentation. And if you would like your question to be posted really during, as in conversation, then please raise your hand and let me know at the end of the presentation and remind me of the questions you have posted in the chat if they have not been answered there. And then our presenters can react. Please keep your microphones muted unless you are presenting or asking a question at the right time. And finally, this conference will be recorded, and the recording will be published on our IDHN forum, and we will send around an email announcing that publication on the forum with the permission of our presenters. So that is the only caveat here. And with that being said, we are moving to our first presentation on Gender and Justice, a quantitative analysis of women's participation and victory in Ottoman courts by Metin Coşgel from the University of Connecticut, Emre Özer from the Istanbul University, and Sadullah Yıldırım from Marmara University. Okay, the floor is yours. just to be clear, you can unmute yourself if you are.
Yes, it took me a while to unmute myself. Sorry, can
No
you see
worries.
my slides fine?
Yep, we can see them.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for the opportunity. Thank you, Irina, and the IDHN network for giving us the opportunity. We are honored and delighted to be here. You saw from the names, this is going to be a four-person paper, and three of us are here to do the presentation. We'll do our best to keep the disruptions to a minimum. I will get started. Let me say at the outset that this is a fairly new paper. We finished it about 3 weeks or so ago. So we would appreciate very much any comments, suggestions that you might have either now or by email, and we'll be happy to communicate if anybody is interested in more details. So this paper, as you can tell from the title, is about gender and justice. Specifically, I'm going to just quickly give you the outline before I turn it over to my co-authors. What we are doing is we are interested in how men and women differ in three questions. The first is in the way they participated in courts. So the question is, when a person has a legal dispute, they have the choice of handling it outside of court by shaking hands, exchanging money, sometimes taking it to violence, for whatever means they have in their hands, or they might just take it to court. And of course, in civilized societies, more and more courts took on this role. Our question here is, what was the participation of women relative to men, either as the plaintiffs or as defendants in disputes? The second question is, once disputes go to court, the Ottoman judges tried their best to have a settlement before a formal trial. They would question the parties and see if they can come up with a resolution without the judge giving a verdict. So in that, we actually get a good look at, this is the benefit of Ottoman courts, by the way, relative to other courts. Not all courts record these settlement cases. But since we have that data, we're asking the question of how did men and women differ in their settlement behavior? Were they as litigious as, were women as litigious as men, or did they settle any differently? And finally, we are looking at among the cases that end up in front of a judge for trial, did men and women differ in their chances of success? I'm going to give the answers to these questions very quickly so you know what to expect. In terms of participation, as perhaps a reflection of the overall society, the powers and socioeconomic participation of men and women in previous societies, men dominated the courts, but women also participated in large numbers. And the exact ratios differed from one court to another, one type of case to another, and we'll show you that in a few slides. In terms of settlement, we don't see any systematic differences. Yes, in some types of cases, women settled more in greater fractions than men, but there isn't anything that cut across. Women were not as, let's say, peaceful, amicable in reaching a settlement than men necessarily. In terms of victory, the first cut look at the data shows us that men were more likely to win against women than the other way around. But then what we do is we throw in some other variables in the analysis for controls. One of them seems to explain what's going on behind this thing we observe. And that is women's inferior ability back then to present evidence in the form of witnesses or documents or legal opinions. And because they are less able to present evidence, they end up winning, rather they end up losing their cases against other women or and also against men. We will detail all of that. This is just a first shot look. For our data come from the sigils of the Ottoman courts. You probably noticed the Ottomans were very carefully recording all court proceedings, and a lot of them have been preserved over the years. And we take advantage of some of these data. We'll detail that in a couple slides. And our data come from the two courts in Istanbul, in the capital city. By far, the largest amount of court data come from Istanbul. And so we have a lot of data coming from there. But then we also have from two provincial towns in today's Anatolia. Some of our data come from that. Before I turn it over, let me just say very quickly, place this paper in context. We're not going to do a detailed literature review, but this is very much related to the literature on women's legal history and also Islamic history, where there is a lot of attention paid to the first question. Were women involved in courts? This goes back to 1970s, Ronald Jennings' work and so on. What we contribute to that literature is we don't just ask that question is whether, but to what extent we can actually quantify that information. And of course, the other contribution we make to that literature is we add not just did they participate, but did they actually settle, did they win, all of those in a quantitative manner. And another literature is, of course, you guys in this audience who are interested in digital humanities, you'll notice that there are two types of, the way I see it, two types of works in this literature. One is in terms of digitizing the data. So this could be a narrative, it could be court records, it could be all sorts of things, obviously. And a lot of efforts go into how best to digitize, to preserve and make them ready for analysis. The second part is in the area of interpretation and analysis. There you can run software, you can run keyword searches, do all sorts of things. You will see that our analysis differs somewhat in that it is quantitative, and our data likewise, our effort is put behind quantifying our data. So with all that, I'll mute myself, turn it over to Emre, and but I'll run the slides.
Thank you, sir. Hi, everyone. I will give some information about the data sources of our study, namely Ottoman courts registers. Then try to explain how we convert information in these registers into quantitative data. First, let me talk about Ottoman courts in general. Judges of the Ottoman courts had three main functionaries: judicial, administrative, and notarial. That is why court registers consist of many different types of documents, ranging from the imperial orders to guardianship documents. In addition to their judicial responsibilities, judges also have duties about the tax collection, war preparation, market regulations, etc. Among these different document types, we focus on the summary of disputes and settlements for this study. I say summary because the court records doesn't give all the details of a case or a settlement. Next slide, please. Here you see the distribution of court registers, sigils, across Ottoman lands. Registers are dispersed all regions of the empire. This picture is taken from a different project. As you can see, Istanbul and some important courts, I think some parts of Syria and Palestine, have produced more sigils compared to others. Different colors show the total number of registers. Yellow ones are more crowded courts. Next. Here on the left, you see a sample page from the Galata court register. A sample case record is marked with yellow rectangular and will be discussed in detail shortly. The first sigil is in Ottoman Empire, dated back to middle of the 15th century and continued until the end of the Ottoman Empire. Not all registers have made it to come the present day. However, approximately 20,000 registers survive today. Half of them belong to Istanbul, the center of Ottoman Empire, and the others to Anatolian, maybe today's Turkey borders. Besides, there are nearly 8,000 court records, court registers outside of Turkey, especially in the Middle East and Balkans. These registers can be reached at, you see the name of the libraries as microfilms. You can see it on computers if you go one of these libraries. You can also have internet access, some of them, at State Archives website. I posted it here. A register can be 300 pages long and approximately consists of 200 records. 200 records means 4 million records just for Turkey's sigils. This is a huge number. Here the sample I have mentioned before, you see part of which shows a sample case record. Highlighted parts are information that we collect and write in an Excel sheet and use some of them for this study. I will show the Excel sheet in the next slide. For instance, yellow part is the name of the court. It is generally comes beginning of the records. Green parts are the names of the plaintiff and the defendant respectively. From the names, we infer their gender, the main point in this study, title and religions. Sometimes occupations are mentioned. It is in pink color as you see here. After introduction of the parties, you see red rectangular shows the claim of the plaintiff. Then defendant's response comes in blue rectangular. Because defendant didn't accept the accusation in this case, evidence is asked from the plaintiff. Plaintiff brings two witnesses whose names and titles are in purple color. At the end, last part in orange, we see the court's decision about the case. Next, how we convert. Here you see the transcription of the sample record. It's colored same as previous slide to give you some understanding about the data collection process. Of course, we didn't transcribe all the records. It's just an example. This is a case between an ex-wife and husband. Ümmü Hani Binti Mehmet wants his mehir payment. Mehir, an amount of money that should be given to women upon divorce, because his ex-husband divorced her last year but haven't paid it yet. The ex-husband, named Abdullah Beshe, denies the accusation and he says that he didn't divorce her, so mehir payment is not an issue. Because of the denial of the defendant, court wants evidence from the plaintiff. After two witnesses testified about the divorce, the court declares its decision and obliged the defendant to pay the mehir to the plaintiff. How we convert this text into data? We write the information into an Excel sheet. As you see, for instance, court names, their gender, religion, etc. At the last column, you see the decision of the court as plaintiff wins. He said winner. After completing the Excel sheet, we transform them into binary variables. For instance, if a litigant had a certain property, say being male or Muslim, it takes the value of 1. If not, it is 0. Here, plaintiff is female. That is why we put a 0 in gender of plaintiff and 1 because she is a Muslim. As we said, we infer from the name of the plaintiff, and similar things for the defendant. In the last column, if the plaintiff wins the case, it takes the value of 1, and if she loses the case, the value becomes 0. Here, plaintiff won the case by transforming the collected data into binary variables like this. We will be able to make econometric models by using this data. Next one. We have collected the data from 4 courts. As mentioned before, 2 of them are from the Imperial Center, Galata and Üsküdar in Istanbul. Other 2 courts are Konya and Kütahya from the provinces. Here map shows you court locations. The time period is roughly at the beginning of the 18th century, before the Reformation era. And last, the data consists of 2,524 case records. Thank you. I will leave the rest to our next author, Sadullah Yıldırım.
Thank you, Emre. Now I'm gonna talk about the quantitative analysis of gender differences in participation, settlement, and victory. Before that, let me remind you dispute resolution. 3 key stages of dispute resolution is represented by this decision tree. At first node, represented by 1, disputants need to decide whether to take the dispute to the court or not. And many disputes, of course, are not being taken to the court. What we observe in our data is just cases that end up in the court. So in the second decision node, disputants decide whether to settle the dispute or take it to the trial. Okay. In the third decision node, now judge decide who wins the dispute, plaintiff or the defendant. Now we're going to look at the gender differences in participation, settlement, and the victory at trial. So first, is there any gender differences in participation? You see, we look at 4 gender categories here. Woman can take other women to the court, or woman versus woman. Woman can take men to the court, woman versus man. Men can take woman to the court, it's men versus woman. Men take another man to the court. So first party is plaintiff, second party is defendant in that categorization. So this figure shows us the number of disputes taken to the court by gender groups across case types. Case types that we consider here: criminal cases, commercial cases, and commercial cases, which are mainly the family disputes in marriage, divorce, and disputes related to inheritance division. So what we see here, the legal disputes in court dominated by males, but females also participated in large numbers. Also, we observed higher female participation rates in civil non-commercial cases, which are mainly includes disputes regarding family matters and inheritance. Next, please. Also, we looked at participation across courts by gender groups. We see that we observed that participation rates were similar across 4 courts. You see similar pattern what about the difference in settlement, gender difference in settlement? This table shows the fraction of disputes that were settled in that decision tree. So we observe no systematic gender differences in settlement versus trial, and most disputes are going to the trial. You see these settlement rates are 26%, 25%, and etc. Next one, please. So next, we look at the gender differences in victory at trial. This table shows the fraction of trials won by plaintiff. So first 2 row show where the men are plaintiff. Bottom 2 row women are plaintiff. So across the columns, you observe that the fraction of trials won by plaintiff when plaintiff are women, those fractions are lower compared to top two rows. So it seems that the women seem disadvantaged compared to men as plaintiff in Ottoman courts. But can we make judgment just by looking those fractions, those average numbers? Would it be enough to make that that claim that the women are disadvantaged in the Ottoman court? So there might be other factors affecting the plaintiff's probability of winning. For example, years in which the dispute taken to the court, or which court the dispute taken place, or what type of case disputed, what was the matter in the dispute. Also, evidence use matters in winning the dispute. For example, bringing witness or written documents or legal opinions may increase your probability of winning. So when we take those things account, then can we observe any differences between those gender groups? In order to implement these ideas, we used regression analysis. This is a regression table. In first two columns, in first column, we do not control anything. So this is similar to the previous table. It's just the mean differences between gender groups. And we see a significant difference between when women take men into court against men, they are losing the case. When we control in the second column, for example, year or case type or court, the effect size goes up. Also, we are getting more statistical significance. The stars represent the statistical significance. In the third column, we add evidence use, witnesses, documents, and legal opinions. And those effects, as you see, disappears. The size goes down and the statistical significance goes down. So it seems that at first, women seems disadvantaged, but those are mainly because of they are not able to bring evidence to the court. So in the next slide, more on why they lost. Women less likely to present evidence as plaintiff. Here again, this is another regression table. Here is the dependent variable is again binary variable that equals 1 if the plaintiff present any evidence, witness, documents, or legal opinions at trial, and 0 otherwise. As you see, when the woman versus woman case, this is the likelihood of a woman bringing any evidence against man is negative or has a negative sign. So they are less likely to bring evidence against man compared to men versus man. Next. So summary of our finding, we asked 3 questions. We look at the gender differences in participation, settlement, and victory at trial. And we find that the legal disputes in Ottoman court dominated by males, but females participated in large numbers. No systematic gender differences in settlement decision. And in victory at trial, women less likely to win. Why gender differences in victory? Because of women's inferior ability to bring evidence to the court. That's all. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you all for this inspiring presentation. I'm quite impressed on how big, how many sigils there are for Turkey. I read 40 million sigils for Turkey alone. That's a gigantic corpus. And of course, digital and quantitative methods are especially promising to engage with such a big corpus. So thank you for showing us how you go about it and how one can engage with such a diverse and interesting big corpus. I think I have seen their questions in the chat. I would like to encourage you to speak out and just raise your hand and let me know you want to pose a question. I do ask you that if you have a question, that if possible, you switch your video on just so that it's kind of nicer to communicate to someone you can see, and that you briefly introduce yourself with your name and your affiliation, maybe when you ask your question. So with that said, do we have questions from the audience? Otherwise, I will scroll through the chat and see what we have. Okay, I can see here Fatima Ali has asked which type of regression analysis was used. SLR or MLR is another.
Okay, this is ordinary least square, just a simple regression, nothing fancy there.
Excellent. Hope that answers your question, Fatima. Otherwise, I encourage you to raise your hand. And then Boac Ergene has asked, by settlements, you mean settlements that took place in the court and recorded in the court records, I believe. What about those settlements that took place outside of the court? Is there a way to account for those?
So I think we are, I'll go ahead and answer that. There is, I think, Boac, you know the answer better than I do to that question, and the answer is no. Unfortunately, we don't have any type of external evidence in regards to how else settlements were resolved if they weren't brought to court. In any case, our study is based exclusively on what was brought to court.
Thank you. I was hoping that you found a way.
Yeah, nice try.
We will in the future. Simonetta Calderini asked, can women's inferior ability to present evidence be linked to their financial status and ability to release funds for documents, etc.? What's your thought on that?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
Yes, absolutely. And again, I encourage you all to actually ask those questions by unmuting yourself and just joining the conversation. We do not have to go through the chat because the scrolling can make it a bit difficult. So we have the question, can women's inferior ability to present evidence be linked to their financial status and ability to release funds? So basically, is finances an issue, or is it really just, as kind of witness, their witness status?
Yeah, on that, your guess is really as good as ours because we don't really know. We could obviously talk about that forever as to what caused it. It could be the discrepancy between men and women in education, in social involvement in general, or perhaps their inferior legal status that makes them, because their word doesn't count as much as men, and perhaps their support in terms of witnesses doesn't come through as much. So if you actually look at the difference between case types, settlement rates, so we have to be careful to say there are no systematic differences. There are differences, but they are case-specific differences. So we can't say a generic gender-based comment, we can't make a gender, we cannot attribute it all to gender, whether there are any differences. There are, in some cases, in family disputes, for example, in criminal cases, if you look at the data, I don't have the time to get into it now, but we do find differences in ways that we can explain.
Excellent, thank you, Metin. I see Rich Nielsen, you have raised your hand. Please go ahead.
Hi, very interesting. I wondered if, one, you've thought about like a formal mediation analysis kind of thing. This had like a mediation analysis feel to it, where it's like, here's the main effect, and we think it flows through this evidence channel. And so I wondered if you'd thought about taking it one step further. And then on this issue of kind of, are the cases different? I guess I still was concerned that that there might be like unobservable differences basically in the types of cases, and that certain types of cases are more likely to have female plaintiffs, for example, and those cases are more likely to be evidence poor or something like that. Kind of a generalized confounding sort of question. I was wondering if you had reactions to either of those.
Yes, very interesting questions. Obviously, the question of mediation, how it happened, Bauch and I dealt with this in more detail in our book that in 2016 than we do in this paper. We didn't get into details because our focus here is just gender difference, but certainly how did that mediation happen? What kinds of factors affected it? That's a fascinating question for those who are looking for research topics based on sigils. And in terms of unobservable differences, of course, there are a lot of confounding factors that we simply don't observe. Among the ones that we do observe, in fact, our story about evidence use is exactly that there is, if you just look at the averages, which is, by the way, what the literature has so far been doing. If you look at the more, let's say, qualitative literature that is interested in understanding whether men and women participated, it's usually stops at the level of taking some kind of an average and looking to see, did women, if you did that, of course, you find women to lose, but that doesn't really take the analysis any further. You don't explain. When you throw in the witness and other types of evidence into the analysis, you find that that's the confounding factor. And that's what explains what's going on here, yeah. And there may be others that, I took notes, there may be others that we could look at, and we will, as much as we can, that our data allow. Unfortunately, because sigil records are summaries, not everything got put in there. I wish there was more information that we could extract. Yeah.
Thank you. There have been a few questions also about your how you prepared your data. Subhan Kirmase-Altin has asked, can you tell us a little bit more about the data prep stage? Were the records transliterated and converted to tabular data manually?
I think I give a short answer to this. Yes, we haven't transcribed all the data. We have read the data in original form and entered the data manually in an Excel sheet, then use them.
That's a lot of work. And then Fatima Ali has asked if there is a chance to see the codes that you, in order to learn from them, or I think it's interesting to all of us if there are parts of your data, or what parts are publicly available, and where can we find them if we were interested to take a closer look.
By code, do you mean like the Stata program or code, or?
I'm not quite sure. Why don't you just tell us the things that we can see?
Well, at the moment, we are not really sharing the data or any parts of it. I suppose we could, just for at least for illustration purposes. We haven't really thought about that question. So for those who are looking for some data that you can use for this kind of analysis without having to go to archives or something that's somewhat digitized, and I would recommend that you look at, I think it's, what is the website, kadısicilleri.org or something that's out there. They're not transcribed, you still have to do that. But I don't know of any already transcribed data set that's out there. You know, most people are, and we are in this category, we have the data, we are still working on it. So making it public basically would put an end to our use of that data. And so we're not at the moment doing that, but we'd be happy to maybe meet with you privately and show on a screen what we are doing and share with you our Excel sheets and codes and whatnot, and at least show it to you. If you send us an emails privately, we'll be happy to do that.
I think we all have to respect how much work goes into the preparation stage, whether it is, you know, just building a corpus and the different steps related to that. And so we have to regard that not just as a resource, but really as already academic work in itself. That, of course, you know, it's wonderful when we can make it publicly available and share with everyone. But sometimes it does make sense to keep building, you know, and not not publish something before it's actually completed. But also, of course, we have to respect the need to just kind of do your own work first. So absolutely understandable. I think it's a great offer to contact you all directly, and just for those of you who are interested. I think I would encourage our presenters to continue with those of our audience who still have questions in the chat, and we move on to our next presentation. With that said, thank you very much for this really very interesting presentation. Next up, we will hear about Razam, a data set for the recognition and analysis of scripts in Arabic Maghrebi scripts, and presenting to us will be Noémie Lucas from the University of Edinburgh, Clément Salah from the Sorbonne University and the University of Lausanne, and Shahan Vidal-Goren from the École Nationale des Chartes. You are up. Please share your screen, and thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you very much, Irene, for the introduction. So we're very pleased to present you today our dataset, Razam, and the research we carried out from January to June 2021. Thank you very much to the organizer of the IDH network for giving us the opportunity to talk about this research. Arabic scripts raise numerous issues in text recognition and layout analysis, and the more so when it comes to the unwritten scripts, for example, in Arabic manuscripts. Can you change the slide, please, Shahan? So this experimental research that we are presenting today aimed at tackling these issues. Next slide. For 2 years, I think, yeah, it's been 2 years now, a French research consortium entitled Middle East and Muslim Words has made the issue of Arabic OCR and HTR one of its priorities as part of a broader work on the digital outreach of the French research on Middle Eastern studies, Islamic studies, and studies on the Maghreb. Therefore, questions related to digital philology of Arabic text, and in particular to HTR issues, have been the subject of research, training courses, and experimental investigation. Our project took place in Paris in the framework of a partnership between this research consortium, the BULAC, which is the University Library of Languages and Civilization, and with CALFA, whose Shahan is the founder and the president, which is a startup specialized in document analysis and understanding, and which is specialized which is specialized on non-Latin scripts and under-resourced languages. So between January and April 2021, we organized a hackathon for the collaborative transcription of manuscripts in Arabic Maghrebi scripts. And this scientific event had multiple objectives. So the first one was a scientific objective. We aimed at developing and assessing the feasibility of automatic text recognition for a type of manuscripts, which is Arabic Maghrebi scripts manuscripts. We also wanted to build a database for research purposes in order to facilitate the dissemination of advanced HTR technologies to promote automatic processing of Arabic Maghrebi handwritten collection. And we also wanted to evaluate the use of the Calfa Vision platform for the processing of a new non-Latin script language for the platform, which was not actually dealing with Arabic before. The second objective was to promote studies on the Maghreb and to valorize manuscript collection, because the Bulac holds the second largest collection of Arabic manuscript in France, with more than 2,500 documentary units, And the collection includes a large number of manuscripts from the Maghreb, which are the subject of a promotion campaign, which include digitization and which now available online for some of them on the BINA website, which is the digital library of the Bulac. And at the moment, the library counts 273 manuscripts, Arabic manuscripts online. The last objective of the project was to train to digital humanities. And this is part of an investigation on the best way to train researchers and students to tools and digital methods for their own research. We thought that gathering some researchers and students to work together on a specific project with concrete objectives would be more efficient than theoretically training them to HTR workflow and to some platforms. Therefore, can you change the slide, please? This dataset is the achievement of a collaborative work with 14 participants. They have been selected for their abilities to read Arabic scripts, their knowledge of manuscripts, and most of them actually were working on the history of Maghreb. We first trained them to the Calfa Vision platform, and then we met twice a month to work together and check on the progress of the three main tasks, which were annotation and checking the layout analysis, transcription of the text, and the extraction of the lines, that is, notably checking the polygons. At that point, I leave my colleague Clement continue the presentation.
Yes, thank you, Noémie. For my part, I will present to you the manuscript from which we worked, and secondly, come back to the characteristic of the Maghrebi script and present some specific issues of this wording for the HTR. So the dataset that we present to you is based on the transcription of equal parts of three different manuscripts, all kept at the Bulac in Paris. Certain considerations have guided us in establishing this corpus. First, wording consideration. We wanted to have different varieties of the same script family. But at the same time, we wanted to work on scripts that are common. In particular, it seemed important to us that the manuscript on which we are working present wording characteristics of the manuscript on which our colleagues, historians, codicologists, and paleographers are usually dealing with. The second consideration was relating to the variety of the layout. As you can see on the first manuscript, there are tables and fractions. In the case of the MS-ARA 1977, it is quite dense writing, 32 lines per page and many words per lane. This writing is dense, but without issues from the point of view of the layout. In the case of the MS-ARA 417, here we are on a different, very high layout. There are only 12 lines per page and 5 words per lane. And finally, the third consideration was a consideration of the variety in the theme. This led us to choose the MS-ARA 609, which deals with Islamic law, and the MS-ARA 1977 and the MS-ARA 417 deals with collection of history. So I will present to you some characteristics of the Maghrebi script. Can you, thank you, Sharon. When we speak of Maghrebi script, we also speak of Western script or Round script. We designated a family of styles and scripts present, among other, in medieval and modern manuscripts in the Islamic West, Al-Andalus, North Africa, but also Sub-Saharan Africa. A lot could be said about the characteristic of this writing, but I will only point out some of the characteristic features which, in the context of HTR, can pose problem. You can find on the slide a table showing some characteristic of this writing. What can be not, however, Shan, could you? Thank you. We speak of one script, and this is particularly the case for the realization of the letters Nun, Sin, Shin, Sod, and Dad in final position with a loop which will be very round and which often, as you can see, tend to overlap on the bottom line. Also, some letters merge with others. This is the case, for example, of the letter Del and Del on the one hand, which merge on the other hand with the letters Ra and Zain. So there may be errors in the projection of this letter. Also, this is not a unique characteristic of Maghrebi script. The same word or the same letters can be projected in different ways in the same manuscript, on the same page, or even on the same line. This is the case on the slide with the word fi, for example. Another difficulty with HTR is the spacing between words. For example, in the slide where fihi dhalika is made, you see that the dhal is practically glued to the fihi. If you know Arabic, you can distinguish between the two words, but it's not without problems for an automatic recognition models. And there is also the case of an above-mentioned text which constitutes a difficulty, but also certain abusive and singular ligatures, for example, الذي, التي, هذا, هذه. That's all for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Noémie and Clément. As you said, we have indeed used the CalfaVision platform that enables collaborative work, automatic processing, and within the scope of the hackathon, real-time fine-tuning of the three main models for layout analysis, polygonalization, and text recognition. And as my colleague said, the dataset follows two goals. So to provide a solid dataset for recognition of Maghrebi Arabic, and to extend existing datasets as Badam and RASM for layout analysis in particular. It's the reason why, for the creation of the dataset, we have especially favored an approach by baseline in order to manage with curved lines and to be compatible with this dataset. And all data are stored in a page XML file with 3 levels of informations. text regions with their coordinates and semantic tags, so in green in my slide. Text lines with their coordinates and transcriptions, so in blue here, and baseline coordinates. So for each manuscript, it was like a game between predictions, proofreading, automatic fine-tuning, predictions, proofreading, automatic fine-tuning, etc. And it's a relevant strategy to reduce proofreading time and to quickly create a data set when you don't have data. It's generally the case in under-resourced languages or in under-resourced scripts. And you can find a complete evaluation of benefits of such a strategy in the paper. So as you can see in my slide, we have made a lot of experiments. Some models were made directly during the hackathon for our transcription needs, and some models for assessing the dataset. We have trained several models, sometimes specialized on a script, sometimes with mixed data in order to see the benefits or not of transfer learning for this script. And results, all the results are presented in the confusion matrix here. We have used a mixed word-based, character-based approach. It's something we also use for Armenian to manage manuscripts with a huge amount of abbreviated words. And the consequence is it enables us to reduce our dependence to characters. And this way, we can also rely on the lexicon of the dataset to help the recognition engine. And we have also chosen this approach because we have a lot of characters below or above others. And the final models reach a character error rate of 4.8%, a score that is consistent with Latin scripts. And the architectures of models we use are basically a simple convolutional network at the word level. And you can find some details about the architecture in the paper. We also have published about the CalfaVision platform. But another consequence, this choice of architecture is maybe responsible of high character error rate for non-targeted models. And manuscript number 417 is the one who benefits the more of transfer learning due to the lack of data for this manuscript by comparison with the others. As Clément said, we only have 12 lines in each page. But results are already convincing for the scripts. And for instance, for specialized models, we have the following results. So, Clément.
Yes, the first remark that we can make on this result is that the words are well separated from each other. There's, for example, no segmentation problems in the two examples. On the other hand, we can make a list of the most frequent errors. First, bad letter prediction. This is the case with the confusion between the ra and del or between the ra and wow. Secondly, we notice that some letters are missing. This is the case in Billmouth, where the meme was not predicted, or the missing B in the second example. And finally, difficulties relating to diacritical dots. In general, the diacritics of handwriting are done randomly. The diacritics are not necessarily placed above or below the letter, but often shift a few centimeters to the right or the left. This is the case, for example, for the B of the second example, which has been associated with the following line. Yes.
Thank you. Concerning layout, we have not evaluated a complete layout analysis model. Results could be better with a global split of the dataset, but here we only evaluate the fine-tuning during the hackathon. So as you can see here in red, baseline is not an issue. There is no missing lines, but sometimes lines are split in two. We also had a very fast fine-tuning for the main text regions, the main text and catchwords, but nothing relevant for the others, especially tables and numbering, for which we have less than 50 samples, with no homogeneity in the split we have made. So we have finally chosen to delete numbering region in the last version of the dataset because it's something too ambiguous. And for a non-specialized model, we have much more mistakes, but results seems to be readable and even correct some mistakes in the ground truth here in blue. Character error rate for this page is 5.9, but it's finally coherent error rate for a non-specialized model. And highlight it's a BIA of the dataset, the high homogeneity of the dataset.
Indeed, what we observe, first, we find error similar to what we noted previously. Error in prediction of letters, confusion of letters. What is, however, quite symptomatic is that some words are really realized in the manuscript very differently. This is the case, for example, for the word for God, Allah, in this manuscript, which is not realized as the other two manuscripts, and has never been well projected by the artificial intelligence. However, and this is the second important point to comment on, there were errors in the original transcript, and those errors are not reflected in the projection. Here, we are in the case where artificial intelligence has corrected human error. That's all.
And just to conclude, we can notice that using the character error rate metric leads to some limitations. If we have, for instance, some typos in the ground truth, or if the transcriptor has proofread some typos from the copyist, etc. So in many cases, character error rate will be less than the score we provide. It's an issue on which we will work in the future.
Yes, and if I may just take one extra minute before concluding, this summer we started to conduct research to test the versatility of the dataset and to evaluate its practical use for the analysis of other manuscripts in MariaDB script. And so we selected 6 manuscripts, once again from the same digital collection of the BULAC. And since our aim was to assess how efficient the HTR model is on different types of manuscripts with similar scripts, we chose manuscripts devoted to different themes compared to RSM. So on the 6 manuscripts, 2 of them were actually matching the previous theme, so history and law, but the other 4 deal with different subjects: erotology, collection of letter models, collection of prophetic litanies, and grammar. And the idea was to evaluate the versatility of our first model, creating on the narrow lexicon, historical and legal themes, on manuscript with different themes. Doing so, we intend to assess the relevance of a word-based approach. And moreover, we choose manuscript with a variety of layouts and Arabic MariaDB writings. And what we observe so far is a rapid model specialization. Only about 10 annotated pages per manuscript are needed to reach a CER close to 8%. It proves the relevance of the iterative specialization, or what we call fine-tuning. And moreover, we notice better results when manuscripts have similar subjects. So to conclude, our dataset RASAM, can you change? Thank you. Our dataset RASAM is available on a Git. All data are available and can be reused by colleagues who wish to train their own model. A few remarks, the dataset is made up of 300 images with their related ground truth stored in XML file. Note that when it comes to actually margin, transcription is not always provided, and be careful of our transcription convention. All of these are specified in the article, and it will be the last slide. So to know more about our work, we can read 2 articles mentioned on the slide, one about our dataset, RASAM, and the other one about how Calfa Vision platform is actually working. So don't hesitate to ask any question if you have some. Thank you.
Thank you so much all for this very interesting presentation full of technical details and challenges that we typically encounter when working with under-resourced languages. Of course, because this is an under-resourced language or script in this case, this work is all the more important. HCR makes it possible for us to build machine-readable corpora that only allow us as digital humanists to do our work at all. And this kind of work on under-resourced scripts and languages is especially important because otherwise we lose sight of diversity in our field. So I just want to say thank you for the contribution you are making to the field. Typically, and I'm gonna just pose a question myself before we move on, because it is a question I get almost on a weekly basis, and that is where can a scholar that is interested in doing this kind of work start? What is your advice on how to get involved and how to work with HCR, etc.? Do you have any advice?
I can begin to answer, and I'm sure Shahan could add some advice. I think one of the first things you have to think about is, what do you need HTR? Because I think this is really important. You don't use HTR and you don't transcribe I don't know how many lines of manuscript if you don't know why you need that. It can be for edition, it can be for data mining, I don't know, but you need to think about the project before committing in that kind of work. I think this is quite important to underline. So it will be my first advice, of course. And I think the second one would be to work very close to data scientists. Like I'm not from digital humanities at first. I learned, it's been now 3 years that I'm learning and trying to train myself. And I think the dialogue is really important to achieve some results. But I'm sure Shahan has other things to add.
Not really. I completely agree with you, Noémie. Just maybe to extend a bit with an example. Yes, character recognition doesn't mean a lot of things. In fact, you have to define your needs, what you want for the output. And for instance, you can define to automatically recognize abbreviations. You can, for instance, only focus on character recognitions. You would like to focus on the main text or maybe only on the scholars, something like that. So you have to clearly define what you want to recognize and how you want to recognize it. And I think it's the most important part, yeah.
Excellent, thank you. We have also 2 raised hands. Fatima Ali, you have raised your hand first.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, absolutely, we can.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you for the amazing presentation. So I'm a part of Big Bang Data Science Solutions, a training facility, and we're actually working with Al Medina University on a similar project. And our goal is basically to help them preserve these old handwritten Arabic books. So that's our main goal, which is very close to what you guys are doing. So we are looking into OCR. I have a couple of different questions. The first thing is, how did you guys build your data set? Because that is one of the challenges that we are going through, is how do we get our hands on, getting a data set ready for our modeling that would be able to recognize the position of each letter, from the beginning to the middle to the end, standalone. How do we build that data set? Or is there something available that we can incorporate in our model? Second question is, did you guys use the help of a linguist to help you with the entire process? Because as you know, Arabic language, there are many different formats of handwriting, different versions. Did you use the help of a linguist to help you go through the entire proofreading process?
So about the dataset, tell me if I don't answer your question. So our objective at first was this simple question: what do we need, and what do we need to get an HTR for Arabic handwritten script? So this was the first question we had, and the other one was, is it possible, and how can we do that? So it was only, an experimental objective. And I think this is important because it explains why we chose this type of manuscript. And we decided to focus only on one type of writings. This is important, only on Arabic, what we call Khat Maghrebi. So this is only one type of handwritten script for Arabic manuscripts. So it's not Nasr, it's not Nasta'alik. So it's quite specific, and it is due to the library collection we were working with, and this work of valorization of Maghrebi manuscript. So we chose the free manuscript with that in mind, and we discussed with colleagues working on type of manuscript, and we decided to choose free manuscript with type of handwriting they were usually dealing with when they were working on manuscripts. So I think it answered the question of the dataset. About the proofreading, all of the people transcribed were actually people trained in Arabic. So we were the one who proofread everything. For some manuscript, we had some editions, so we could check, even though there's some, differences, but sometimes it helps us to check. But I think for the rest of your question, I'm not really the best to answer.
Maybe to extend a bit, thank you for the question. Concerning the help of linguistic and the help of linguists, in fact, you're right, the model we are using includes some language models in order to help the recognition of Arabic words. And it's also the reason why we have chosen a word-based approach. There is a different kind of approaches, and we have chosen that because you're right, some words, some characters are difficult to recognize, and maybe it's more simple to recognize the entire word instead of the character. But yes, there is a game between language model and word-based recognizer.
Got it. Thank you so much. One last thing, in the presentations, you guys also saw there were books which had little notes on the side of the books. Were you guys able to incorporate that in your analysis at all?
So it was part of the layout analysis. So everything has been recognized in terms of layout, but not all the margin have been transcribed because some, I don't know, we don't have the most challenging pages on the slide, but some of them were quite difficult to transcribe, and we did not focus on that type of text region in the manuscript. But a yes.
Got it. Thank you so much, guys.
Thank you. Excellent. We have another question from Scott Rees. Scott.
Hi, yeah, thanks. And thanks for a very interesting presentation, although as a non-data person, I understand very little of it, actually. But I see the value in it, absolutely. And I have a similar question to the last one that was just asked about kind of, the layout of the script, and if you can talk about some of the challenges of dealing with not only the marginalia, and which often comes in at very different angles, but also interlinear text, which can often be in a different hand and a different pen, and what kind of challenges has that presented, and how have you compensated for them? Anyone?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, we had some interlinear adding in the manuscript. Actually, not that much. Clément, correct me if I'm wrong, but from what I remember, we did not have a lot. Not like if you see the slide on the MSR 1957, for example, you have a lot, but this is the new data set we're working on. So in the first data set, we didn't have a lot of interlinear stuff. What we did when we add is like we add a baseline, like we single out this line and we transcribed it. So it was not a problem for the HTR model actually, but Shan, correct me if I'm mistaken on that. I think I think it was not that a problem. The problem was more about the fact that the line was, going one on the other.
So how do you work with that in a real? I mean, transcribing is great. But at which point you've already figured out the characters, and so, but what about within a real world kind of application where the idea is, I hope the idea is that you can just have a machine a program that is able to read the document as a whole.
Oh, just yeah. So
I mean, maybe I'm jumping ahead too far.
Oh, no, I don't think we have all the elements to answer, but just to extend a bit the precision of Noémie, we don't have a lot of words between two lines, but we sometimes have some letters and generally some ligatures that are above or below the line. And as you can see in the recognition result, it's not something dramatic. And concerning layout, actually, in this slide, we can see that the baseline model is approximately 98 or 99% of good accuracy. So it was not an issue to detect, to localize curved lines. Concerning recognition in the real world, actually, as you can see in this graphic, and you can have more graphics like that in the paper, we have evaluated what are the benefits of application of such models on new images during the hackathon. So we have the first model trained with maybe something like 20 images or 50 images, and we have applied it on new images in order to pre-transcribe or pre-process some images. And we have evaluated that, so you will find some information in the paper. Yeah, but of course, the main idea is to perform recognition in a real world without any supervision.
Well, thank you. It was.
I'm sorry, Scott. I always seem to interrupt you when you want to say thank you.
That's my own slowness.
No worries. But we do want to move on to the next presentation. So I thank you for this insight into your work and into the contribution again that you are making to our field. Great work. And we now move on to our last presentation for today. We will hear about Razi's great exegesis. Can text reuse detection solve a long-standing debate over his sole authorship? Sohaib Said will present. He's part of the Global Quran Project at Freiburg University, and I think also of the Kitab Project. So we're excited to hear your presentation, Sohaib.
Hi, thanks a lot, Irene. Thanks to all the organizers for putting this together, for everyone attending. I'm not formally part of the Kitab Project, but that's the most relevant affiliation I could mention here, because what I'm going to share is based on the privilege I had amongst other researchers from a few different disciplines to make some use of the technology in the Kitab Project. I hope that many of you have heard about Kitab before, and you can certainly hear more about it today. Although I'm not the best person to present the background to the project and how it works, we do have quite a few Kitabis, as they like to call themselves, in the audience, and I'm sure that they'll be of help if there are questions that I can't answer. So, the question that I have pertains to this book. This is my very not digital copy of it, which I'm going to show you some of the issue with regards to a question over its authorship. This is typically known as the Tafsir of Al-Razi. Some copies have that emblazoned on the binding like this, but it remains to be seen whether there are some other people involved in the authorship. One of the core problems we have is that there is no critical edition of this work. All of them are reproductions, copies and pastes, including the digital editions we have online. All of these attribute the whole of the text to Fakhruddin al-Razi, who died in 1210. Scholars generally assume that the whole work is his. So, for example, in one study, there was a particularly misogynistic explanation given in Surah Luqman, which, as I pointed out to the author, should probably be attributed to someone else. So much as it is a problem, it is someone else's problem and not that of Fakhruddin al-Razi. So this author, whom I tend to call pseudo-Razi, is sometimes named with one or another name, which I'll show you in due course. We do find that this claims some statements in early biographies which do get a mention in some contemporary works and some current works as well. And sometimes those claims are dismissed, whereby the biographer said Al-Razi did not complete his tafsir, that so-and-so may have done a tatimma or takmila, a completion of the tafsir of Al-Razi, namely Shamsuddin al-Khuwayi, and namely also al-Qamuli. These are names that are dropped. But you find that some scholars, again in the current time, dismiss those claims and say, well, the whole of the text seems to read from a single author, and any small anomalies should be put down to some editing processes that took place. Now, the question or the issue that has arisen for me is that I've been commissioned to translate parts of Al-Razi's great exegesis. So volume 1 I already did, and volume 1 is not in doubt. But the selection volume of surahs that were chosen for me includes Surah 36, Yasin, and that is one of the surahs that has been identified as perhaps belonging to a different author. So this becomes a very urgent problem for me. How do I go about labeling this when the translation is published? Furthermore, if I or anyone should be able to produce a critical edition, what do we do about these parts which are by pseudo-Razi? So again, a very undigital approach that I took yesterday. I took a pen to my copy just to show you the 3 putative inserts. So the one on the right here, that's insert 1. And then there's the white pages are accepted to be Razi's. And then the yellow, which here crosses over from one volume to the other, is insert 2, the largest of the inserts. And then there's a small white space, again returning to Razi, and then the red is insert 3, as I'll be calling it in this presentation. Now, this is another recent publication, a monograph about the tafsir of al-Razi, or Razi as a mufassir, where, again, the question of authorship is dismissed very casually, I would say. That recent scholarship has shown that Mafatih al-Ghaib was authored by Razi himself. Needless to say, I don't agree with this assertion that modern scholarship has shown this. Now, down below, you can see a mention of Gramlich, a German Orientalist, who was responding to some evidence brought out by Jacques Jomier. But all of this footnote does not give you actually the extent of the evidence that Jomier drew upon. And in actual fact, I had really not realized how rich Jomier's investigation was until after doing my own work on manuscripts. So you know that feeling when you're scooped by German or French Orientalists, sometimes from previous centuries, but this time from the late 1970s, I was scooped by Jacques Jomier. He saw most of the manuscripts that I've looked at, but I'm going to show you the most interesting and attractive of them anyway. And there's no mention here of Abdurrahman al-Muallimi, who has written perhaps the most detailed thing and most significant investigation in the early part of the 20th century. So Muallimi has written an essay which we can find in a collection, Majmur, published in 1996. I'm not sure of its publication history and whether it was circulating freely before that, but at least we have it now. In this essay of his, he's argued for 3 inserts. I'm slightly recasting the way he put it, but this is his point, that there are 25 surahs in the tafsir, amounting to around 11 or 12%, which are by another author. So that goes from Surah Al-Ankabut up to and including Yasin, and then again from Muhammad or Al-Qital up until Al-Waqi'ah, and then again from Al-Mumtahana until Al-Tahrim. So the parts before all of this and the parts after it and the parts in between are accepted as being Razi, sometimes because we have the author has indicated dates, and there are things that are very consistent with his authorship of it, his reference to his other works, and so on. Now, Muallimi was not looking at manuscripts. Of course, he was not using digital methods. He was looking first at what he called ruh, the usloob of the text, the stylistic features, which he details in his paper in a very useful way. He was looking also at how the authors were referring to their sources. So, for example, he says that in the part which we accept to be from Al-Razi, when Zamakhshari is mentioned, he is called Sahib al-Kashaf, and in some of these parts, he is called Qala al-Zamakhshari. So there are small differences in style which give a clue to there being a difference. Dates are part of the investigation, cross-references, because in these parts which are considered to be inserts, there are some strange references perhaps to people who are subsequent to Al-Razi and he couldn't have been quoting from them. There is, just now I was looking again, and there's a delightful little quote where the person who's supposed to be Al-Razi is saying, "On this point, we leave it to the mutakallim and the usuli. It's not for the mufassir." And of course, Al-Razi was an imam in kalam and usul, so would not have been so self-deprecating in this way. There are numerous things like third-person references to Al-Razi himself. Someone is saying, "I've seen this in the writing of Al-Razi, and I think it's good. It's a great point." So it's somebody else who's written this. Incongruous details. So these are all things which have been noted even before the use of digital methods. Now, Al-Muallimi, in his conclusion, attributes the whole of these inserts to Shamsuddin al-Khuwayi, who died in 1239, and apparently had some kind of tutelage under Al-Razi, maybe in a minimal way. Earlier in his text, he mentions Qamuli as well, so there's something strange in his essay where at the end he just says it's all Khuwayi, but earlier on he agrees with what a lot of people have said, that there may be 2 contributors. So then it's the question of whether Al-Razi completed it and parts were lost, or whether he simply did not complete it and then others came and added these parts. So this is the most attractive example of the manuscripts that I can show you, where insert 1 is in a number of manuscripts very clearly marked out. I think I actually skipped one slide where I've summarized the manuscript evidence. So I approached manuscripts with obviously the need to check my translation work. But then, as many of you will know, there has been a big outpouring of digitized manuscripts coming out of Turkey in the past year. And that coincided with my own needs. So my thanks go to all those who have been involved in digitizing those manuscripts and sharing them. That raises lots of questions about how we're using them and so on. But insofar as they're available, I've been getting any copy of Tafsir al-Razi that I could get. I've been particularly interested in finding the oldest copies to see if there's something, what I was calling smoking guns, where it would be just maybe even just the paper is different in this section, or the handwriting changed. In the oldest manuscript, some clue that there was there's more than one authorial hand involved. I did not expect something so explicit as what I found, and as I told you, Jomi had already talked about it decades before, but I was looking for subtle things and found very blatant references. And this manuscript, I won't give you the exact details of it right now because I'll have to publish this, but this is a manuscript pretty much 1 century after the death date of Al-Razi. So at this time, you have some copies which are as clear as this in saying, and this is the end of Al-Qasas and the beginning of Ankabut. It says, from here, this tafsir is authored by, and then a lengthy title for Shamsuddin al-Khuwayi, and then this is some biographical information about al-Khuwayi. And then the end of insert 1, we have, this is the end of al-Khuwayi's contribution, and that's also the end of the particular volume, or the proper word for volume here. So there you have a very clear, explicit marking of this copy, which I believe the dating is fairly reliable to say it's 1 century after Al-Razi. However, not all copies from this time are like this. So there's going to be questions to follow up on as to why some are like this, some are not like this, the lineage of these manuscripts, the regions that they were produced in, lots of things that, for if someone wants to fund a big project, then I'll give you a detailed proposal for it. So some of them are attributing Ankabut onwards to Khuwayi, and not all of them say Ankabut to Yasin. Some of them just say from here is Khuwayi's, and they don't specify an end to that. In terms of the other inserts, there's no explicit mention of them in that way. And that is something that gives pause for thought. However, there are some additions. So basically, these are manuscripts, but at the same time, the work that was involved in it is the work of an editor. That's why I'm not sure I want to call this person a scribe or an editor, because this is someone who was comparing a lot of different manuscripts and giving the same kind of notes we would expect from an editor in the modern times. So in the 1760s, there is one which attributes insert 2 to Al-Qamuli. And this editor says that they have seen earlier copies which indicate this. And he also says something about the style again. But it's not clear exactly why insert 2 is attributed to Qamuli. I don't see any mention there of insert 3. And as you might recall from the image that I showed you before, the insert 3 is a very thin line, a red line as it was in my copy. But I'll show you this again. I did, however, find one copy with a smoking gun for insert 3. And I'll show you how that works. So, long story short, we have got here the end of the tafsir of Surah Al-Hashr. Surah 59. So the next one should be Al-Mumtahana 60. But instead it just says, oh, that's not here. And in the margin, it's just said, okay, this is not in this volume, it's somewhere else. You know, these surahs are missing. And coincidentally or not, they correspond exactly to insert 3. And this is significant because it's not on a separate page, it's in the same page. A copyist has presumably just dealt with what was in front of him or her and just carried on straight from 59 to 67. So that's one that Jomi actually did not notice, so that's something for my own publication. Right, so now we come to the text reuse. So the Kitab project is based upon this text reuse technology, which is PASM. And this visualizer is something that they have developed a bit more recently. You might have seen something within the Kitab blog. It's started to make an appearance. But this was the main thing that I was interested to use because I want to see the book spread out in front of me and I want to just see any anomalies when it comes to these inserts. Now, in this picture, I'm actually, Al-Razi is not here. What we have is Al-Baydawi's tafsir. So Al-Baydawi is a little later than Razi and uses Al-Razi. And the Kashaf of Zamakhshari is one of Al-Razi's main sources. And it's very well known that Baydawi also used Zamakhshari heavily. So this illustration just helps you to see how the chart works here. The visualizer is showing us where there is resemblance between, let's say for simplicity's sake, that each vertical line is like a page. It's actually a 300-word chunk. But if you think of it like a page, then where a page holds a lot of resemblance to another page, you have a long red line. So a lengthy red line means a lengthy piece of resembling text. Of course, resemblance is not enough to establish reuse and lineage and copying, but it is one of the factors that definitely play into establishing a lineage between two texts. So this is exactly what you would expect between Baydawi's tafsir and Zamakhshari's. We have here, Baydawi is shorter than Zamakhshari's. I actually did not realize that, so that was quite interesting to see so plainly like this. And you've got resemblances that are, these golden lines are showing which bits are corresponding with which bit. So as we expect in the nature of this work, the start is corresponding with the start, the middle is corresponding with the middle, the end is corresponding with the end, because it's going in the order of the Quran. So this is the beginning of the Quran, this is the end of the Quran within these commentaries. Now in tafsir, there is potentially, there are some issues that we face specific to tafsir, and I'm noticing that as I dig into the reuse, which is even things like just when they quote the ayat, when they quote the verses under discussion, that can show up as a resemblance. Despite that problem, the results came out to be quite striking and quite evident in support of these inserts. So let's see the first example of this. So in terms of Razi's sources, we have got here the Kashaf of Zamakhshari that we just saw. And we're looking at how Al-Razi is related to his source, Zamakhshari. And as you look across, there are some quite evident bald patches, if I may say. And the most striking gaps are clearly here and here, which correspond closely to insert 1 and insert 2. Now, this bar that I've placed above it, this is from me actually, this is like theoretically where the differences, where the inserts should be. So in creating that, it's a little bit rough, there's some margin of error. So why is there not an exact correspondence between them? That needs some fine tuning. But, here with Zamakhshari, you can see first of all, Volume 1 of Tafsir al-Razi is also a bald patch, and that should be expected because Volume 1 is very different in Razi's tafsir anyway. It's not actually following the normal pattern of tafsir. There are some various patches along the way, but then the most evident ones here are at insert 1, insert 2. Insert 3 does not really show up. It could be said that this actually supports Muallimi's thesis, because Muallimi says that the third insert looks like somebody has been in a hurry and pretty much just copied from the tafsirs of Zamakhshari and Al-Wahidi. So according to Muallimi, there should be heavy use of Zamakhshari here. So it doesn't surprise me, let's say, that we don't see a third gap. Also, it might be hard to discern just because of how small this gap is. So that's the best visualization. It's not going to get better than this one. So enjoy this one, and the others are slightly more complicated. This is Al-Wahidi. So there's a few issues. I didn't discuss this before with the Kitabis actually, so I'm throwing out all the issues here. It should be Al-Basit fi Tafsir, which is what I've downloaded, but then it's showing up as Wasit here, so that's for some reason. But I think that the text is Basit, which is the longer tafsir the longest one written by Al-Wahidi. Also, we have to ignore everything from the middle here in Al-Wahidi, because this appears to be, it's like the footnotes of the edition have sort of shown up here in the system. So that's maybe a bug to look at, or something to do with the way I used it. So if we ignore that, then we have a much more expected set of correspondences in order with the Basit. And we've got a number of gaps, but insert 1, insert 2 seem to be among the clear gaps. Does this suggest that even in this part, which was Al-Razi, that Al-Razi himself was not using Wahidi for this portion? Why not? Questions to explore another time. On the flip side, I wanted to see what about people who were using Al-Razi's tafsir. So famously, Baydawi relied upon Zamakhshari, Al-Razi, and Al-Raghib al-Isfahani. So assuming that to be the case, I looked at this pattern, and let's say the insert 2 does seem to be a fairly evident gap. Insert 1, less so. Insert 3 seems to be a possibility as well. Now, the issue here is, I was excited about this at first, but then I asked myself a serious question. If it's based on resemblance, and if Al-Razi is not resembling Zamakhshari, then Baydawi would not resemble Al-Razi at these points, right? So that doesn't mean what I would hope it would mean, that, for example, Baydawi's copy, because he was in the century following Al-Razi, that his copy may not have had, Al-Razi's tafsir, or he was aware, perhaps, that this part was not written by Al-Razi, so I'm not that interested in it anyway. Why do I want to listen to Khuwayi? I'm just looking at Razi. So those are possibilities, but this data so far does not establish that, because much more digging is needed. Just another case of a heavy user of Al-Razi is Nisapuri, Gharaib al-Quran. And again, one might argue that there's some boldness here, insert 1, and a clearer boldness, insert 2, maybe insert 3. But he is already a little bit later, he's died around 728. So I don't know whether to expect that the text was still unstable at his time, or whether it had stabilized into one corpus. But this is one of the ways that we can tease into those questions, along with manuscripts. So to conclude, based on what I've looked at so far, and it really is the beginning of the investigation in the digital side of things, the inserts 1 and 2 are, do appear more likely when you add this general quantitative kind of analysis, this visualization of it, to the evidence that's already been noted by scholars before, such as Al-Muallimi. What's needed is further manuscript procurement, further study of the manuscripts, looking into their lineages and so on, and finding the early ones especially. Closer look at the reuse, and the tool itself allows us to go into a qualitative approach and to look specifically at these connections, which is something that would take some more time and care. to compare more sources using this tool. If someone could find the tafsir of Al-Qadi Abdul Jabbar, that would be very helpful. If you could do that, please, and get it into the Open ITI. Until then, there's not so many sources that we can look at. And if we can find other people who used Ar-Razi, even perhaps before Baydawi, then we could get closer to that question. Finally, and this is not something that I'm doing, but others are working on, something they sometimes call author fingerprinting. That would be a very, this would be a great case study for it. And one of the things that people have started to do in a couple of publications in English and also Japanese, if I recall correctly, is starting to compare parts of Razi's tafsir with what we have of the writings of Al-Khuwayi. So by comparing that, we could also establish these, if these are inserts, are the inserts belonging to Khuwayi or any particular theory that we might suggest. So I'll end here and I'll welcome your questions.
Thank you so much, Sohaib, for your presentation. Authorship attribution problems are really a very classical example of digital humanities, and also one of the first engagements of humanists with digital methods. And what you have presented today is a new, really, it's very exciting because it's making use of a new tool to approach this classical problem in the digital humanities, namely PASM, in assessing, exactly these questions, of which there are quite many in the Islamic tradition. So these kind of attribution problems come up quite frequently. So thank you very much for the insight into your work. Fantastic. Yes, where do we have questions? And I assume that we do. I did not follow the chat closely enough. So please raise your hand if you have a question. I'm finding it difficult to believe there are none because I have quite a few. So Maxime is actually raising his hand. Then I will give, before I take over, I will give Maxime the floor. Okay.
So I actually thought that maybe Sarah wants to comment first, and then I'll add my comment to that.
Absolutely.
Oh. Okay. So it's so good to see you, and it's wonderful to see you making use of the data. I particularly want to just say that we spend a lot of time thinking about the connection and how to make those connections between discussion of the manuscript evidence and also the digital. And I thought the way you put that together was very convincing. We haven't done ourselves one of those, put a pile of books and then show, graphically where that comes. I thought that was quite a nice illustration of text reuse. Maxime and I sort of chatted about what we thought you might try as well. Just to offer the, in addition to text reuse, but just to offer for anybody, we have this user group, and we really want in the next couple of years to be rolling out our data and also to be giving access to people to be doing work with us. So things like metadata, are of course a big challenge. We've got tons and tons of works. So they're all over the place. We'll find things like you've shown, so where things have been left in or the title may not be quite right. And we're human, and the stuff we've taken most importantly from is done by humans. So we will collectively, improve things. So that's all. Ryan Muther is also here just to say, who is worked on the PASM algorithm, so he works with David Smith. So I asked him to also turn his camera. But Maxime, I'll turn to you.
Yeah, I only wanted to kind of add that, of course, text reuse is not the only method which is efficient here. And actually, if anything, I would first go with the stellometric analysis, and specifically rolling stellometry, a method which was offered by Maciej Eder. And it's actually extremely easy to use, so easy that it's a little bit even embarrassing. But it actually just kind of goes through your text and checks automatically the chunks, overlapping chunks, and compares it to whatever samples of text you give to it, and you can actually see, because I think what you've already quite clearly shown with this text reuse data is that, okay, that there's something off with one specific insert for sure, right? It's clear. It's just like it doesn't show on any other sources who reuse the stuff seed, right? The stuff seed. So, but this rolling stellometry would give even better results, including a possible match based on this on the comparison of the styles of different authors. So yeah,
that's an excellent comment, and thanks so much. I'm very keen for the Kitabis to also to share more with everyone here. But yes, so I basically took the opportunity of being, you know, invited to participate, and actually when I got involved with the Kitab training, I hadn't initially thought about applying the Kitab technology to this other question, which was keeping me awake at night. And then I saw that we could actually, it could actually feed into that. But definitely, I would want to follow up with other tools and methods that could be more informative. But I was pretty happy that it showed something, and in a way confirmed certain suspicions and theories.
I would like to add on, because Maxime has actually made the point that I wanted to go into, that stylistic consistency may be a good way to approach it. It's not necessarily a better way, as you say. I think we have to think them about different ways that reveal different information. Stylistic consistency sometimes is amazing in showing us exactly where there are breaks in style. So often they can tell us something about where it shifts potentially. It can also kind of reveal, you know, it's kind of formalistic measure in the sense of, you know, I think I've worked personally actually a little bit with that on Nasihat al-Muluk by Ghazali and the question of authorship there, because that's a classical example where there's two parts and it's also kind of questioned. And it's what I found particularly interesting is that classical scholarship from Patricia Crone, etc., have actually manually kind of done the work that algorithms can do now today. For example, assess, for example, the use of personal pronouns and how that changes to make an argument. And I just want to point that out. So there are different layers and there's different information to be gained. And I think, you know, PASM will just offer us another perspective in addition that will kind of, you know, add information. So for everyone who is wondering, I also have to agree with Maxime. So it's an R library, the Stylo library in R, where this stylistic, you know, stylistic measurement is a feature. It's quite easy to use. I can totally recommend trying it out and just playing around with it and see what you learn from it. Maxime, you've raised your hand again.
Yeah, just a small comment, because you mentioned, you've said something that I've heard already several times about like doing things manually and then doing it with a machine. In many ways, I think actually in all ways, the machine does what we can think of, which means that what we can do by hand, we just cannot do that because of the volume. But machine doesn't do any magic. It does what we would have done if we had, as one author once put, 500 monks at hand, who would have collected all the data, sifted through it, and you know, and arranged it in a particular manner. So just this. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, to follow up on that, I make that point frequently when I talk to other people who ask me and who are very scared of the digital humanities because they believe in some form it requires, you know, something that they are not familiar with. And I make that point, you know, that in a way, really digital methods are a continuation of what we've been doing all along. In fact, Montgomery Watts published long ago an article in which he specifically says, in order to assess authorship, it makes sense to, on a large scale, as you know, manually is permitted, kind of use objective criteria that is measurable. And this is, of course, what we mean by quantitative methods. The quantitative doesn't actually have to be digital, it can be manual. but of course, the larger the quantity, the more feasible it is to do that digitally. So lots of comments rather than questions, but I just want to stress how informative it is to see this perspective added to the table, and because I really truly believe that it informs us on another level. So not in terms of one is better than the other, but it just reveals different information. Thank you. Now, again, I haven't been following the chat. Do we have more questions from the audience? Okay, great. I mean, then everybody hopefully learned something. I think with that, we will move to the concluding discussion, which really is another check-in with the audience. If there are comments, if there are questions, to all of our presenters, if there are recommendations to be made on papers to be read, anything you would like to add at the end of this conference that we should all hear, now is your chance, because otherwise I will say goodbye. But let's see, because I see the chat going, and I can't, if you want to share this publicly or aloud, please do.
Can I just say something quickly?
Yes, please, Metin.
We gave the first talk. It was more on the numbers, and the one that you were just mentioning. We could have, you're right, we could have, I suppose, done all of that by hand, and doing it digitally helps. The other thing that helps is collaboration. And I noticed a lot of the papers were co-authored, but oftentimes they're co-authored from the same discipline, as is our paper. All four of us are economists. Another place where some distance might be gained is, I think, co-authorship across disciplines. So, for example, I'm watching now here some of the works that you're dealing with, and I, as an economist, can think of ways in which I can analyze, but I just can't do what you're doing. So it's one thing for digitization to push us to the next level. Yet another way in which we can gain some distance is through interdisciplinary collaborations. And the one that I'm closely familiar with is when I work with Bosch, my co-author from a history department. It was just amazing to be able to, to be sure, we had a lot of difficult times in making sure we understand the same things, we are asking the same questions and all that. But once you go through that, it's very, very productive. I would encourage everyone to, if you're reading somebody else's work and it looks like you can contribute something, to reach out and work together. It's useful.
Thank you, Metin, for that comment. I really think that is a very important note, and also my recommendation for the many people who ask me how to get involved in the digital humanities as a humanist. I like to point out that it's not necessary for all of us to learn programming, for those of us who don't know it yet and are humanists. What is necessary is to learn how to talk to one. And the first step is talk. I think we are very used to sitting in our own little, rooms with our desk and our books and working alone, while in other disciplines, collaboration is much more established. And the digital humanities do force us out of this room, because it is work that is interdisciplinary by nature and is especially fruitful in this interdisciplinary engagement. So I can only second what you've just said. I have taken also the time to go through the chat actually in the meantime, and I found a question that we've not been able to pose yet to Sohaib from Menwa, and I'm sorry I overlooked that. She asks, in the future work, you mentioned fingerprint comparison. Do you have an initial criteria to consider for the comparison?
Yeah, apologies to Manuel. I didn't mean to overlook it, but I felt that perhaps the points made about stylometry and rolling stylometry might be the best answer that I could give to it, because I don't know much about other things that might be called fingerprinting. I just know, I'm just aware that it's something that people do. So, you know, I would go into it really as fresh as I went into this work with Kitab Project. But I think that, you know, applying the stellometry methods does, you know, it sounds like it's going to be the most elucidating. The thing is that there are so many questions really that, you know, that surround the story of Razi's authorship, and it's difficult to really uncover a lot of details about that. But it remains possible, and this would be another thing to try to solve, whether digitally or otherwise, that Razi himself had drafted insert 3 from Wahidi and Zamakhshari. I didn't get round to updating it and fleshing it out in the way he's done with other sections. So neither the reuse data by itself, and I'm not sure if I can assert this, but perhaps nor the stellometry would be conclusive in that. But I definitely want to assemble whatever pieces of the puzzle I can, and that would include manuscripts.
Excellent, thank you so much. I see comments by Sarah, and I'm just trying to read it all. Sarah, do you want to make the comment?
I mean, sure, I don't know if we're out of time, but we have we use the alignment files and sort of stack them in this one visualization through Power BI that allows you to see the precision and compare the pattern across, you know, the pattern of reuse across a work. So you have a base work, and then you have different colored dots at each of the milestones, depending on the number of words that align. And it sometimes can really be helpful for seeing the sequence, not just the quantity of reuse, and then therefore the most likely candidate. So between, when you have these works that have multiple layers of reuse, where this one reused, that one reused, that one. So I use it for Nueri to try to compare Ibn al-Athir and Tabari as potential candidates for parts of it. So there's other visualizations, I guess is my point. You can build once you have access to the files.
I actually would like to check in with you. So there's two things I've wondered. So Hype has said they are similar. So it ended these kind of text reuse instances do not actually, or I mean, the word was used similar, and I'm wondering how you measure similarity and what is exactly meant by that. Are they exact? So they're not exact matches?
Are you asking how PASM works?
Yeah, PASM. Sorry, I should have contextualized my question.
Yeah, I can't speak to the specific example of Sohaib, but and maybe it would be better for Ryan to answer. But the point is that there's a series of algorithms in the software that deal with comparing insertions and absences, and then mathematically. But we gaps. So there's a whole series of parameters that we've been evaluating over some time. But Ryan, do you want to say more on similarity idea?
Sure, on how exactly similarity is measured in PASM. So essentially what PASM does is kind of, after some first filtering to go through and kind of weed out pairs of documents, which in this case are going to be your 300-word chunks, that don't actually look similar at all. It then has, some remaining set of pairs that have, some baseline level of similarity where the computer can quickly look at the texts and go, yeah, there's some shared material here, or no, there isn't. Then once you have those pairs, it goes through this alignment process where it tries to essentially, figure out, if I were to take pieces of this chunk here and arrange the characters in such a way, possibly with some gaps, that I kind of maximized the correspondence with this other text here, again, possibly with some gaps, what's kind of the maximum score you can get for doing that?
Yeah, thank you.
Does that make sense?
Yes, I actually got the question in a private chat, so I just wanted to put it out there for it to be answered. It's actually easier for me if you post questions, not to me directly, but in the group to everyone. That's a bit easier for me. But the question that I originally had, and that is back to Sarah, is that these kind of visualizations and engaging with PASM kind of already requires that I have suitable candidates to compare to, right? Like I have to identify those first in order to have kind of my original and then compare it to whatever I'm looking for. If I, for example, have the question like, so HiPass, is this original Erazi, but do not have a candidate to really compare it to, then that obviously poses a bit of a challenge. Or is there a way, like, how do you address that? You always have candidates, and how do you identify them? I'd be very curious to hear.
So kind of the point of PASM is that you don't need to go in knowing what you're looking for. Like if you have a large enough, like, yes, the source of your text needs to exist somewhere in your corpus for PASM to find it, but you don't need to necessarily know it is there. Like PASM was originally used for doing kind of similar sorts of analysis on large collections of newspaper corpora from the 19th century for the Viral Texts Project. And that's a setting where you very much don't know going in what you're going to find, just because the reuse is so much more widespread and any individual text is less significantly studied. Like no one's going to be able to go and say, ah, yes, this edition of, I don't know, the Boston Globe from 1865 is particularly well circulated. It is meant as a tool for kind of some discovery.
So the data we get then, we load, well, first of all, we do a whole stats file, and Masume is here on the call too, who's very much involved in this process. And so based on the stats, we have an application we use internally, and that you can filter by any work and see how many alignments in how many other works. And so if you're building what I'm describing, I guess the Nueri app, for example, you would pull and use the files and the output files with the alignments for all of the works that have some threshold, of alignments with Nueri. And you can build this out in any other way too. I mean, with any other work kind of pivoting. There's also another data set we'll be working on shortly that does something a little bit differently that works to Orion, that works to the document discussion, that looks to see sort of throughout the corpus for every milestone, the milestones that align to it globally. And that's in its own form of data set. So that way we'll have to process that differently. So there's quite a lot of sort of engineering that goes on in the background, to get to a visualization of any form. But that essentially is built off of these comparisons, as Ryan's describing, and then some long and hard thinking about how to make sense of it. But the data set's really the key, to making those choices. All of this will be revealed and shared, importantly, when we finish our books, which is the thing we're doing next year. We promise.
Excellent. We're looking forward to it. Thank you for that clarification. I play a little bit the devil's advocate in order to show the diversity of really what can be done. But I think at this point, if there are no more questions, I would like to thank Sohaib for the last presentation and for triggering this or motivating this larger discussion. I would like to thank our the Kitab team, of course, for joining into this discussion, all of our presenters, our guests and audience today, and again, the IDHN team that is in the background and has worked on making this conference happen, and will be planning the next one as well. So thank you to all of you. For, again, the guests today, I encourage you to join IDHN. It's completely free. If you are interested, please become a member and join us for the next conference that we will have in the spring of 2022, typically around April. But we will announce that when the time has come. And with that, I thank you all for today's conference. And I have learned a lot. I hope so have you. And I will see you next time in spring, inshallah. With that, bye-bye.